Welcome to today's story, The Deadly File. Step into the shadows of Finland, where a secret mission uncovers dangerous experiments, hidden enemies, and a fight for survival. Follow Ian Munro as every step draws him deeper into a deadly conspiracy. Chapter 1. An Assignment for Munro. "Read these," said Naylor, handing 3 small newspaper cuttings across the desk. "Alone they don't mean much, but together—" He stopped and looked out of the window, half closing his eyes in thought. "Together, they may show that something unusual is happening." Ian Munro picked up the 3 short reports and studied them carefully. In one, fish were dead for no clear reason. In another, 2 people had died, probably from poison gas, and in the last, there were fewer birds than normal in a town. If the stories had come from different places, nobody would have noticed. But all 3 were about Lahti, a town in Finland, and all had been published within the last 8 months. The most recent one was dated April 14th, only a few days ago. Munro looked at Naylor, a tall man with grey hair and sharp blue eyes. He wore a dark suit, white shirt, and blue tie. Munro thought again how little he knew about Naylor. But then Naylor spent his life sending men on missions from which they might never return. Perhaps it was no surprise he had few friends. "I see what you mean," Munro said, leaning back in his chair. "What do you think is happening?" "I'm not sure," Naylor replied. "Some kind of poison, possibly gas. Maybe someone is producing it, but we don't know who or why. Not yet." He placed the stories back into a file. Munro noticed the word Lahti written on the cover. "You lived in Finland for some years, didn't you?" Naylor asked. "How is your Finnish?" "Good," said Munro. "People often think I'm from Lapland." "Excellent. I want you to go to Lahti." 20 years ago, people would have called Munro a spy. Now he was called a foreign executive. The work was the same, only the title was different. "You're on the 12:35 flight to Helsinki," Naylor continued. "Your tickets are ready in the travel office downstairs. You have a meeting in Lahti at 6 o'clock this evening, on the steps of the church in Kirkkokatu. "Who am I meeting?" Munro asked. "A man named Pentti Virolainen. He has information about these events. Find out what he knows, then wait for more instructions. Any questions?" Munro had many questions, but he knew Naylor would only give what was necessary. "Just one," he said. "Why us? This is a Finnish problem. Why not let the Finns deal with it?" Naylor leaned forward and placed his hands on the desk. "The information I have suggests it wouldn't be wise to tell the Finns. I can't explain more right now. It may become clearer later." Munro said nothing. Sometimes the job was easier when you didn't see the whole picture. Chapter 2. The Church Appointment. 7 hours later, Munro checked into the Lahden Seurahuone Hotel on Aleksanterin Katu, one of the main streets of Lahti. He spoke English to the receptionist. He enjoyed using Finnish, but it was better if people thought he couldn't understand. That way they might reveal things without knowing. In his room, Munro unpacked carefully, as he always did. He arranged his clothes in a way that would show him if anyone searched his things. There was nothing to find, of course. He never carried important documents and never carried a gun. A gun only raised questions. Munro looked at his watch. It was already 5:45 p.m. Time to go. He checked his appearance in the mirror. Light grey eyes, dark hair that was almost black, slightly long but neat. He wore jeans and a grey top. He picked up a city map. Just another tourist out for a walk. On the street, he checked once more to see if anyone was following. He had already done so at the airport, and after leaving the coach in Lahti, but one could never be too careful. Only last year, An executive had been killed at Bangkok airport before starting his job. The street was crowded, so Munro took his time. Nobody was following. Good. It was still light and warm for April. As he crossed the market square, Kaupatori, he saw the church to his right. The tourist leaflet at the hotel said it was designed by Finnish architect Alvar Aalto and completed in 1978. Munro usually liked Finnish architecture with its clean style, but he thought this church was rather ugly. He turned into Mariankatu and walked up the hill to the church. The street was empty. At 5:55 there was nobody on the steps. At the top, he looked left and right along Kirkkakatu. A woman walked a dog in the distance, and an art gallery stood closed on the left. Munro crossed the street and stood in its doorway. From there he could watch the church steps without being seen. The first rule of meeting a stranger: see them before they see you. The woman and her dog disappeared. A boy on a bicycle passed. Then an old lady in black came out of the church with a heavy bag. At 6 o'clock, Munro pretended to study the paintings in the gallery window while scanning the streets. No sign of Virolainen. Minutes passed. The old lady went into an apartment, a cat crossed the road, and sat in the churchyard. Munro checked his watch again. 6:10. 5 more minutes, then he would leave and call London for new orders. Suddenly he heard footsteps running. He stepped back into the doorway. People ran when they were late, or when escaping danger. A man appeared from the side of the church, stopped at the top of the steps, and looked around nervously. He seemed hunted. Munro stayed hidden. If this was Pentti Virolainen, something was wrong. A safe meeting should never feel like this. Then Munro heard a car engine climbing Mariankatu. Too loud, too fast. He turned quickly to his right. Too late. He understood what was about to happen. Chapter 3. Broken Plans. The car was a black Mercedes. When Munro saw 2 men in the front and 2 in the back, he knew they were not tourists. He dropped flat to the ground in the doorway, trying to make himself as small as possible. By the time the car reached the top of the hill, it was speeding. The tires screamed as it turned into Kirkkakatu. 4 sharp cracks followed gunshots. The Mercedes raced away down the street, turning quickly out of sight. Munro lifted his head, ready to run across the road. Luckily, the men hadn't noticed him. But Virolainen had not been so lucky. He lay on the church steps, blood across his shirt. Munro glanced up and down the street. Nobody was around. Virolainen was clearly dead. The information had died with him. It was time to leave. Back at the hotel, Munro took a whiskey from the bar to his room. Death was part of his work, but it never felt normal. He sipped the drink slowly, then picked up his phone. A short text was safer than a call. He typed quickly, "Meeting off. Executive safe. New orders needed." While waiting for London's reply, he opened a copy of Etelä Suomen Sanomat, a local newspaper he had picked up earlier. There was an article on Finnish bioengineering and an interview with Jorma Lappalainen, a wealthy businessman. Lappalainen said, "Finland should lead the world not only in the internet and mobile phones, but also in science, especially bioengineering." Munro learned that Lappalainen was also entering politics. Soon Finland would choose a new president, and Lappalainen had announced his interest. The article added that he lived with his sister and owned homes in Helsinki, Lahti, and the south of France. A photo showed a short man with very fair, almost white hair, waving at a cheering crowd. Munro thought it was the usual politician's smile, empty, not honest. His phone beeped. A single word appeared on the screen. "Wait." Munro smiled slightly. Naylor never wasted words. He clearly needed more time before deciding the next step. Munro went down to the bar, ordered another whiskey, and watched the people passing outside. Friday night in Lahti, young men and women heading to bars and discos. He thought back to his student years in Finland and remembered that he had once believed Lahti had the most beautiful women in the country. He opened a menu, realizing he was hungry. Just then, a soft voice spoke behind him. "If you don't understand the menu, maybe I can help you." Munro turned. Two striking blue eyes looked at him from a face framed with short blonde hair and a bright smile. "That would be kind," he said, smiling back. "Rita Koivisto," she said, offering her hand. "Ian Munro. Are you English?" she asked. "Scottish," Munro replied. Koivisto tilted her head, smiling. She sat beside him, lit a cigarette, and asked, "So tell me, what's a handsome Scottish man like you doing in Lahti?" Munro laughed lightly. "I'm just a tourist, enjoying Finland and meeting wonderful Finnish people." "Of course," she said. "We are wonderful because of the wonderful weather here." They both laughed. But as she ordered food for him, Munro wondered who this woman really was, and why she was asking so many questions. Chapter 4. The Woman's Game. At midnight, Munro stood under the hot shower in his hotel room, letting the water wash away the day's troubles. There was still no message from Naylor. With Virolainen dead, one lead had been lost, and London needed time to find another. Munro's thoughts turned to Rita Koivisto. She seemed to believe his story about being a bank worker on holiday. She said she worked at a company called Bioratkaisut, though she claimed she was only an office worker and did not know much about what the company did. She lived in Nastola, a small town outside Lahti, and had left earlier in a taxi. But something about her story did not ring true. Munro felt she was hiding more than she told. He stepped out of the shower and dried himself. He was tired. As he looked in the mirror, there was a soft knock at the door. Peering through the spy hole, he saw the short blonde hair and wide smile of Koivisto. She held 2 glasses, one of whiskey, the other of Jaloviina, a Finnish brandy. "There were too many waiting for taxis," she said brightly. "So I came back. I thought you might like a drink before bed." Munro took the glass, smiled, and let her in. As she passed, she brushed close to him. He closed and locked the door. She set her glass down beside his, then placed her hands on his shoulders, pulling him towards her. Her lips pressed hard against his. He kissed her back. Soon, her jumper fell to the floor. Munro woke with a shock. His head ached, his eyes hurt, and his mouth was dry. The room was bright, though in Finland even April days were long. What time was it? What had happened? He remembered drinking with Koivisto in the bar, then her visit at midnight. They had been together, but after that? He looked around. The glasses were still there. Nothing smelled unusual, but his clothes had been moved. The wardrobe, drawers, and suitcase had all been searched. Munro staggered into the bathroom. The cold shower cleared his head. He swallowed aspirin, drank a liter of cold water, and dressed quickly in jeans, a denim shirt, and a leather jacket. Just then his phone beeped. A new message appeared. "Call on Safeline." Naylor had found another way into the problem. Munro was back in the game. Chapter 5. Shadows in the Streets. Munro disliked using mobile phones. People said calls couldn't be listened to, but he wasn't so sure. In Finland, home of Nokia, if anyone could listen in, it was the Finns. He used his phone only for short-coded texts. For a safe call, he preferred public phone boxes. He stepped out of the hotel onto Aleksanterin Katu. As he walked, he heard conversations around him. Shot on the church steps. Terrible thing. Are the streets still safe? Nothing like this has ever happened. In daylight, too. Virolainen such a kind man. The killing had shaken Lahti. With only about 95,000 people, it was usually a peaceful place where even children walked safely at night. But now fear filled the air. Munro found a phone box. Naylor answered at once. "Give me the full story," he said. Munro told him about Virolainen's death, then added, "Check on a woman called Riitta Koivisto, Koivisto. She says she works for a company named Bioratkaisut and lives in Nastola. She searched my room last night." "I see," said Naylor. "Describe her." "About 170 centimeters, slim, attractive, short blonde hair, blue eyes, intelligent but good at pretending otherwise." "I'll look into it," Naylor replied. "Meanwhile, I've got an address for you. Ruolankatu 24, flat 15B. Be very careful. These people are dangerous. This may be our last chance." Munro hung up, then quickly dialed the hotel. After a safe call, it was important to make a second call so no one could trace the first. He decided to check the market square before visiting Ruolankatu. He needed to be sure he wasn't followed, but he didn't get far. Less than 100 meters away, a man in a green jacket suddenly found a shop window, very interesting when Munro looked his way. Within minutes, Munro spotted more too many. He played the tourist, reading menus, staring into shop windows, strolling casually. By the time he reached Kaupatori, he knew he was surrounded. 3 men in front, 3 behind, and 1 on each side. Worse still, 2 cars had joined the chase. Munro walked to a taxi, asking in English for directions to the Sibelius Stalo, the concert hall by Lake Vesijärvi. As he spoke, 2 cars pulled up, and more men hurried out. Munro thanked the driver and walked off. One of the followers immediately questioned the taxi driver. He headed towards the lake. Normally he would have enjoyed the spring walk, but today he noticed little. The snow was gone, though the grass was still brown. The lake remained frozen from the long winter. He reached a cafe by the Sibeliustalo, bought a beer, and sat in the sunshine. The men still followed, keeping their distance. He realized the problem clearly now. If he went to the Ruolankatu address with them behind him, both he and his contact would die. He needed to escape them fast. Munro stood up, walked to a phone box nearby and called London. Chapter 6. The Escape Plan. After speaking to Naylor, Munro walked back towards the city centre, passing the bus station. The men were still following. He also spotted one of their cars parked ahead. At the bottom of Aleksanteri-Katu, he turned quickly into a side street, then again into Hämeenkatu. He slowed his steps as he reached the entrance of the Hotel Lahti. Suddenly he slipped inside. For the first time in 2 hours, the followers couldn't see him. He had to act fast. He remembered visiting this hotel 10 years ago, and hoped the layout hadn't changed. It hadn't. There was no reception desk. The front door led straight into the bar and restaurant. In front of him was a lift. To the left, stairs and double doors. A few people sat in the bar, but no staff were around. Munro ran left, up the stairs. On the first floor, he checked both directions. Empty. But below he heard the front door crash open and loud voices. He hurried up to the second floor. A man was trying to unlock a room, clearly drunk. He had short grey hair, wore a denim jacket and black jeans, and swayed from side to side as he struggled with his key. "Don't move." The drunk muttered at the door in Finnish. "Stay still while I open, you stupid door." Munro grabbed the key from him. "Let me help." Voices and footsteps sounded on the stairs. Munro opened the door quickly, pulled the man inside, and shut it quietly. The room had 2 single beds, a wardrobe, a TV, and an armchair. A half-empty whiskey bottle sat on a bedside table. The grey-haired man looked at Munro uncertainly. Munro acted fast. He turned on the TV and pushed the man into the chair. "Sit down, watch this. I'll get you a drink." The drunk slumped into the chair, muttering about room service, and fell asleep. Munro pressed his ear to the door. He heard someone knocking on other doors and asking, "Have you seen a man in a brown leather jacket and blue jeans?" Then he heard keys turning. They were going to search every room. Munro opened the wardrobe, finding clothes and a sports bag inside. The voices came closer. Munro stripped quickly, stuffing his jacket, jeans, and shirt into the bag. He splashed whiskey on his hair, chest, and hands, then put on a black t-shirt he found over a chair. A knock came at the door. The drunk slept on. Munro lay on one of the beds, wearing only the t-shirt, pants, and socks. He placed the whiskey bottle near his face and turned away from the door. The key turned. A short, dark-haired man entered, saw the two drinkers, and checked under a bed, then the bathroom. He opened the wardrobe too. Munro held his breath. "Anything?" called a voice from outside. "No," the man replied. "Just a couple of drunks." He left, closing the door. Munro waited a few minutes, then checked his watch. It was nearly 2:30. He knew it would be a while before they gave up the search. Lying back on the bed, he started to think about his next move. Chapter 7. Breaking Free. Just before 4 o'clock, Munro rose from the bed. The grey-haired man was still asleep in front of the television. Munro guessed they were about the same size. In the wardrobe, he found old black trousers and a worn blue jacket. In a drawer, he discovered a baseball cap and dark sunglasses. Quickly, he changed clothes. Looking in the mirror, he saw how different he looked now. There were also a pair of trainers on the floor. A bit small, but useful. The tight fit changed the way he walked, something that could help confuse his followers. To complete the disguise, he splashed more whiskey over himself and even drank a little. Now he looked like a man lost in a long weekend of drinking. Checking his phone, he saw a single message from London. "Vijay 563. Munro looked out of the window at the car park. A blue car sat opposite, with a man inside smoking and glancing often at the back door. Clearly they were watching both exits. Still, at least they no longer knew Munro's face. He went downstairs and decided to try the back. Pushing through the door, he staggered into the car park, acting drunk. He walked one way, then turned suddenly to the other. The man in the car got out. He wore a red t-shirt with the name Harry on it. Munro guessed his job was to question everyone leaving the hotel. Harry approached him. "Having a good party, my friend?" he asked in Finnish. "Not bad," Munro slurred. "I don't drink here much," said Harry. "I prefer better places." "Got a cigarette?" asked Munro, wanting Harry close. But Harry stopped suddenly, looking closely at him. Munro couldn't risk it. He kneed Harry hard between the legs, then punched him in the face. Harry fell, but a knife flashed in his hand. Munro knew this was serious. Harry staggered up, furious. "You'll regret that," he said in English, stepping forward with the knife. Munro backed into the wall. "You can't go back further." Harry smiled. "Now I've got you." He lunged. Munro dodged right. The knife struck the wall and fell. Harry's hand smashed against the stone. Munro swung a fist, breaking Harry's nose. The man dropped heavily to the ground. Munro looked down at him. "I should have told you I'm Scottish, not English." Shaking from the fight, Munro dragged Harry's body under a car, then ran out toward Haminkatu. But there were still men waiting at the front of the hotel. Chapter 8. Meeting the Sister. Munro ran onto Haminkatu. As expected, 2 men stood outside the front of the hotel, smoking. He quickly turned the other way. 20 meters down the street, he saw a grey car parked across the road. Its number plate read VJ563, the code from London. The 2 men threw away their cigarettes and began walking toward him. "Quick!" Munro shouted in Finnish. "There's a fight back there. Call the police!" The men ran past him, heading for the car park. Munro wasted no time. He opened the grey car, found the keys under the seat, and drove away. When he was sure he had lost his followers, he pulled over and sent a short text to London. "Thanks for the car." Ruolankatu was a housing area in the southwest of Lahti, with tall apartment blocks built in the 1960s, surrounded by trees. Number 24 had a small supermarket on the ground floor. Munro parked at the back and went to the front entrance. He pressed the buzzer. "Yes, who is it?" asked a woman in Finnish. "Ian Munro from London." "Come up," came the reply. Munro climbed to flat 15B and knocked softly. The door opened. The apartment was small, a narrow hallway, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with a sofa, armchair, shelves, and a CD player. The woman who let him in looked around 35, with shoulder-length red hair and blue-green eyes. She wore a shirt the same color as her eyes, white trousers and flat shoes. Her face looked worried and tired. "I'm sorry I'm late," Munro said. "And excuse the smell, I had some trouble on the way." "That's all right. I'm just glad you came," she replied in English. "We can speak Finnish if you prefer," Munro said, switching languages. "Thank you. That's easier." She gave a weak smile. "Would you like some coffee or food?" Munro realized he hadn't eaten since the morning, after Riitta Koivisto's late-night visit. "Yes, please." While she prepared sandwiches and coffee, Munro looked around. On the shelves were books in both Finnish and English, pop music CDs, and family photos. He studied one picture of a man close to her age. He recognized him. It was Pentti Virolainen. The woman returned with a tray. Munro took a sandwich and spoke gently. "Pentti, was he your brother?" "Yes," she said, glancing at the photos. "I'm Seppo Virolainen. Just before he went to meet you, he told me everything he knew. I think he realized something might happen. He knew they were watching him." Munro reached across and touched her hand softly. "I'm sorry about Pentti." "Thank you." "Please," Munro said, "tell me what he told you." Chapter 9. Sirpa's Story. Sirpa Virolainen looked out of the window, gathering her thoughts. "You have to understand," she began. "Pentti was bright. He didn't go to university, but he was intelligent. He did well at school, but didn't want to study forever." Munro stayed silent, letting her continue. "He left school at 18 and got a job at a company called Bioratkaisut, which had just started." "Bioratkaisut," Munro interrupted. "Yes, do you know it? I met a woman last night who said she worked there." Munro explained. "What was her name?" Sirpa asked. He told her, but Sirpa shook her head. "I don't know her, but that doesn't mean she doesn't work there. Pentti and I weren't very close. We lived in the same town, but we didn't see each other often. We never talked about his work until the other night." "Go on," Munro said. "He was a laboratory assistant. Mostly he organized equipment, but sometimes he helped with the experiments. He began to notice there were projects he wasn't allowed near. At first he thought it was chance, but one day a scientist left some papers behind. Pentti looked at them. Sirpa's eyes brightened as she spoke faster. They were working on poison gas." Munro set his coffee down. "What happened then?" Pentti kept watching. He thought only a few scientists were involved, but they were developing several poisons. He didn't know who to tell. The police wouldn't believe him against a respected company. Then, a few months ago, during a big meeting of biologists in Lahti, he met a British scientist in a bar. He didn't say everything, but enough. Last week, someone from London phoned him and arranged the meeting with you. Sirpa went into the kitchen, returned with a cereal box, and pulled out a folded paper hidden inside. She handed it to Munro. "He gave me this too," she said. Munro opened it. The writing meant nothing to him, but it was clearly scientific, probably formulas or notes. He thought something might happen to him. Sirpa added. He said he was being followed. Munro nodded. He slipped the paper into his jacket. "I'll take this back to London, but first we need to get you somewhere safe. You can't stay here." He went to a phone box and called Naylor. Penty left some notes with his sister. "I have them now." "Good work," Naylor replied. "Fax me a copy as soon as you can. First I'll get her to safety." Munro insisted. "Agreed. Then send the paper and call me. I have more information and new orders." Back at the flat, Munro explained that her brother might have been followed here. "It's not safe anymore. I'll take you to Helsinki. It's easier to hide in the capital." 10 minutes later, they were driving south. But after only 5 minutes, Munro checked his mirror. 2 large jeeps were racing up fast behind them. Trouble was back again. Chapter 10. The Road Pursuit. The car Munro was driving was clearly not his choice. It was light, not very strong, and not fast. The 2 jeeps chasing them were heavier and quicker. As soon as he spotted them, Munro pressed the accelerator. The car reached 160 kilometers an hour, but the jeeps kept closing in. "What's wrong?" Sirpa asked, turning to him. "Look behind us," Munro said. She gasped. The motorway was almost empty, offering no traffic to hide in. Munro thought fast. He could never win a race on a straight road. He needed smaller roads with more turns. Up ahead, a side road appeared. He let the jeeps get close, then suddenly swung the wheel and turned sharply onto it. The first jeep shot past, unable to follow in time. The second one reacted quicker, skidding dangerously on 2 wheels before making the turn. Munro checked the mirror. Only 1 jeep remained on his tail, but the driver was skilled. No matter how fast Munro took the corners, the jeep stayed close. The narrow road was lined with trees. No turnings appeared. Then came a straight stretch, and the jeep rammed their car hard from behind. The force threw Munro and Sirpa forward in their seats. "Hold on!" Munro shouted. He saw a rough forest road ahead to the left. If he could reach it, they might stop and escape on foot. It was their only chance. The jeep struck again, harder this time, smashing the back corner of the car. Munro fought the wheel, but the car spun out of control. Everything slowed. The car rolled across the road, then over onto its roof, then its side again. Sirpa screamed as it flipped once more, crashing into the trees. Munro had one thought. As soon as the car stops, take off the seatbelt. But before he could act, the car slammed against a trunk with a terrible crash. His head hit the side window, and darkness closed in. Chapter 11. The Sauna Trap. Munro woke with a pounding headache. He lay on a wooden bench in a small room made of wood. A sauna. His hands were tied behind his back. Across from him, Sirpa lay on another bench, also tied. Her eyes were closed. But when Munro called her name, she stirred. Slowly her eyes opened, then widened as memory returned. "Where are we?" she whispered. "I don't know," Munro answered, struggling to sit up. The door opened. A short man with very pale blonde hair entered, a gun in his hand. Munro knew at once who it was. "Mr. Munro, Ms. Virolainen," the man said calmly. "Mr. Lapalainen," Munro replied. It was the wealthy businessman and politician he had read about in the paper. Suddenly the picture made sense. His interest in bioengineering, his power in Finland, and the reason London hadn't trusted the local authorities. "Ah, you know me," Lapalainen said with a cold smile. "Hard not to," Munro answered. "One of Finland's most important men, but why lock us here? Because you and Mrs. Virolinen's brother have interfered in my business." Lapalainen replied. "Your business?" "Yes, I own Bioratkaisut." Munro's mind clicked. That explained everything. "The company makes good profits, not just for me, but for Finland." Lapalainen went on. "But developing poisons is not legal, of course. Still, another country offered me huge sums to organize the work. We created a powerful poison gas, strong and almost without smell. They wanted it. I don't know why, perhaps for war, perhaps to kill their enemies. I don't really care. The money will help me become president of Finland." "And the scientists?" Munro asked. "They're well paid, but really they care only about their science. Rules mean nothing to them." Munro shook his head. "When people discover the truth, your dream of becoming president will be over." Lapalainen looked amused. "And who will tell them? Not you." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, the one Sirpa had given Munro. He smiled cruelly. "You're in a sauna. In Finland we keep them very hot, 95 to 100 degrees. But today you'll have a special sauna, one you won't leave alive. The door is blocked, impossible to open." He laughed loudly. When he left, Munro immediately turned to Sirpa. "Quick, back to back. Let's try to untie each other." They struggled, but the ropes were tight. The heat rose. Sweat poured down their faces and clothes. "Let me try yours," Sirpa said, working desperately with her fingers. At last the ropes gave way. Munro freed his hands, then quickly untied hers. He hurled himself against the door. Nothing. Breaking off a piece of bench wood, he smashed it against the small window in the door again and again. At last the glass shattered, and cold air rushed in. Reaching through, he felt the heavy wooden bar blocking the door. It barely moved. Blood ran from his hand as he struck it over and over. Finally, it crashed to the floor, and the door flew open. They ran out, down the stairs. The factory seemed empty. It was Sunday. But as they reached the ground floor, shots rang out. Sirpa cried out and fell, hit in the leg. Munro pulled her behind boxes, his eyes searching for the shooter. He heard Lapalainen's voice echoing. "I don't know how you are still alive, Mr. Munro, but you won't be for long." Chapter 12. The Final Confrontation. From the sound of his voice, Munro guessed Lapalainen was above them. Sirpa's leg wound had bled badly, but the bullet had gone straight through. Munro tied his handkerchief tightly around it. "Stay here," he whispered. "He can't see you. I'll find him." Keeping low, Munro crept toward the stairs. He knew Lapalainen had a gun, but he also knew the man was no professional fighter. Politician, businessman, yes. Gunman, no. Munro scanned the floor. The factory had several staircases. Lapalainen might already be down, hunting him. Suddenly, a sound behind made Munro spin around. Lapalainen stood there, smiling coldly, gun in hand. "You've made me very angry," he said. "Now show me where she is, and then I'll deal with both of you." Munro turned his back and walked slowly forward. He wanted Lapalainen close enough to press the gun into him. As soon as he felt the hard metal against his back, he acted. His hand shot up, knocking the gun upward, and he spun around. Lapalainen fired once, the bullet flying harmlessly into the air. They struggled fiercely. Both men gripped the gun, fighting for control. Lapalainen clawed at Munro's eyes with his free hand. Munro had to let go, or risk blindness. Suddenly he smashed his forehead into Lappalainen's nose. The man screamed, dropping the gun. Blood poured down his face, but anger gave him strength. He charged at Munro, fists flailing. Munro sidestepped and struck him hard on the head. Lappalainen collapsed against a pile of boxes. When Munro turned, Lappalainen was holding a small metal bottle. He twisted the top open with shaking hands. "It's over," he gasped. "I won't sit in prison. My company made good poisons, and now one of them will serve me well." "No!" Munro shouted, but he was too late. Lappalainen lifted the bottle to his lips and drank. Within seconds his face turned grey. He clutched at his throat, gave a strangled cry, and fell still. The powerful poison had claimed its maker. Chapter 13. Loose Ends. Munro and Sirpa spent the next day at the Salininkatu police station, giving full reports. Munro had already called Naylor, who told him to hide nothing from the authorities. With Lappalainen dead, people would be more willing to speak the truth. Police teams searched the Bioratkaisut factory and questioned the scientists. The news services announced Lappalainen's death, claiming he had suffered heart problems. The real story remained hidden. Even without the truth, the company faced serious damage once the public learned about the poisons. Munro also told police about Riitta Koivisto. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. She was Lappalainen's sister, Koivisto being her married name. Since she had searched Munro's room, she was likely part of her brother's plans. Police raided the family's homes in Finland and France, but Koivisto had disappeared. The next day, Munro drove Sirpa back to her flat at Ruolankatu. Doctors had treated her leg, but she still limped badly. At her door, she smiled. "Come in, Ian," she said softly. Inside, she turned suddenly, pulling him close and kissing him hard. Wincing from the pain in her leg, she stumbled, and Munro lifted her easily in his arms, carrying her to the bedroom. As he set her down, he realized again how beautiful she was. She kissed him again, running her fingers through his hair, whispering, "Love me, Ian. Make love to me." The next morning, Munro packed his bag at the hotel. He had promised to visit Sirpa before leaving for the airport. He paid his bill at reception and was about to leave when the receptionist called out, "Mr. Munro, there's a phone call for you. You can take it there." Munro lifted the receiver. "Ian Munro," a voice said. "Someone here wants to speak to you." Another voice came on. "Ian, is that you?" It was Sirpa, the first voice returned. Munro recognized it at once. It was Riitta Koivisto. "Good," she said. "Mrs. Virolainen and I are at the top of the Salposelka ski jump. It's a long way down. If you don't come quickly, she'll find out just how far." "What do you want?" Munro asked. "I want you," Koivisto answered coldly. "Come now, don't call the police. Don't bring a gun. Take the lift up to the top alone." The line went dead. Munro lowered the phone, his face pale. "Are you all right, Mr. Munro?" the receptionist asked. Munro handed him his bag. "Please keep this for a few hours. I have something important to do before I leave Lahti." Chapter 14. The Last Battle. Munro took a taxi to Salposelka, where 3 ski jumps stood side by side. The tallest had a lift to the top. At the base was a small shop selling tickets. Munro paid, then entered the lift. The April afternoon was quiet. Nobody else was around. On the way up, he tried to prepare himself. Riitta Koivisto had made her orders clear. He had to follow them, but he knew it would be dangerous. At the top, the doors slid open. The platform was empty except for Koivisto, standing opposite with a gun. She wore jeans and a white sweater, her face pale but her eyes burning with anger. "Out!" she shouted. Munro stepped forward as the lift doors closed behind him. To the right, stairs led higher. There was blood on them. On your knees, Koivisto ordered. And stop worrying about the girl. She's already dead. Munro's heart turned cold. Too late for Serpa? He dropped to one knee. He needed to keep Koivisto talking, to buy time. So you worked with your brother, he said. He was everything to me, Koivisto replied bitterly. When my husband left, Jorma cared for me. He gave me work. I helped run his companies, even Bioratkaisut. He wanted to be president. He had great plans, but you destroyed him. She stood 2 meters away, too far for Munro to grab the gun. So you knew about the poisons? Munro pressed. Of course, she snapped. He was making money to lead Finland. He would have been a great president. Now he's dead because of you. Munro needed more time. How did you know who I was so quickly after I arrived? Lahti is small, she said. We knew Virolainen had spoken to a British scientist. We guessed someone would come. A British tourist without a camera? Suspicious. We watched you. Munro's eyes flicked towards the bloody stairs. Why kill Virolainen's sister? He asked. She helped you, Koivisto said fiercely. She gave you information. She had to die. The gun lifted slightly in her hand. Then, from above, came a sound half scream, half cry, a voice in pain. Sirpa! Koivisto turned her head, startled. It was the chance Munro needed. He lunged forward, seizing the gun with both hands. It fired once, the shot echoing into the air. The weapon flew from Koivisto's grip and slid into a corner. But she didn't run. She spun toward him, fists raised. Munro braced himself. She attacked with a fast kick taekwondo. He dodged, the kick missing his face by inches. She moved with skill and fury. He circled closer, watching her eyes. She lunged again, hands flashing toward his face. Munro twisted aside, then struck hard at her neck just below the ear. A sharp sound followed, and Koivisto collapsed to the floor. She did not move again. Munro snatched up the gun and rushed upstairs. The top room had glass walls on 3 sides, with views stretching across the bright lake below. But Munro saw only Serpa, lying on her side, blood on her blouse. He touched her neck. She was alive. Relief washed over him. Quickly he called the emergency number. Doctor, top of Salposelka ski jump. A shooting victim. Hurry! He dropped the phone and took her hand. Gently he opened her blouse. There were entry and exit wounds, but no heavy bleeding. Her eyes flickered open. It's all right, Munro said softly. You'll be fine. The doctor is coming. Yes, she whispered weakly. You're here now. Munro smiled. Don't speak. Save your strength. He looked out through the glass walls. Lake Vesijavi shone in the spring sunlight. Winter was over. Serpa was alive. For one brief moment, everything felt right with the world. Thank you for watching The Deadly File. If you enjoyed this thrilling adventure, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more exciting stories. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Munro's place?